Hey everybody, this is Chris from Skeleton. This video is part of an ongoing series where we showcase progress updates for Skeleton v3, also known as Skeleton Next. Today's update we're going to kind of split into two parts, just given the scale and scope of things. This video is going to cover some proposed plans and updates for our popover interfaces, things like drop-down menus, tooltips, things like that. And then the second part of today's update will cover modals, drawers, toasts, and various kind of modal systems. So be sure and check out both as they kind of discuss similar topics. To begin, we're going to just dive right in and start discussing pop-ups. So you may have used pop-ups in Skeleton v2. It's found here in the utility sections pop-ups if you're curious where this page is located. There's a few things to kind of note of what a pop-up is, how it operates. So I figured I'd start just by discussing that. So if you come in here and you click the demo, you're going to see just kind of a pop-up UI or pop-up interface here. You're going to see several different versions of this with different kind of hover styles or click methods or inputs that you can hover and focus and things like that. Lots and lots and lots of options and demos here. For the most part, this works pretty well. This started as a very simple tool that was just basically made for put a button on the page. When I click that button, I want something to display. And then hover came later and on and on and on until it kind of grew into the feature that it is today. We use a dependency for this to kind of help provide, power this behind the scenes called floating UI. So if you hear me mention floating or floating UI, I'll talk through some of that in just a little bit more detail in just a moment. But before we go too far, I want to showcase kind of what is happening behind the scenes when you actually click one of these buttons. So if we look at the actual code samples, you're going to see there's some settings that you can provide. Think of these like parameters that are provided to set different kind of events, methods and so on. But really, it kind of comes down to two portions. So you have a trigger element, which is typically like a button, and then you have the actual pop-up that displays the contents that appear on the screen. When you actually click the pop-up, we have a use pop-up option here, which is using a svelte action. And then it just takes in the settings that are provided up here. You can see we can mention what the target element is, which is down here. This is the target. And it's just kind of keyed into by the data pop-up attribute applied here. So behind the scenes, there's a svelte action running. It's looking and trying to link and query against the data pop-up element and kind of forms a pair, right? So you have the trigger and you have the actual element that it's targeting, right? So that's the pair in this scenario. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what that looks like. If we go and look at kind of what a svelte action is, in case you're not familiar, these are just a tool that's provided in Svelte. They're called different names and different frameworks. In Angular, they're called directives. So if you're from that. If you're familiar with Angular, you may have heard that term. But the general idea is it is giving you an interface to interact with DOM elements. Typically, is the key element. It's headless, as opposed to something like a component, where a component has logic and state, but it's not necessarily trying to display any kind of UI like a component. So the best example I can show is right here on this Svelte tutorial site. They're actually doing a tooltip, which is really nice. So when I hover this button, you're going to see a little tooltip appear, and when I go off, it disappears. And the way they're doing that, they're using the call function here, use, which says, hey, I'm about to use a function that I'm going to provide, which is called tooltip, which is linked up here. And then it's going to have some settings that are the parameters that are passed in, and then do something with that. And so that could be used in all different ways. We use this for like the copy to clipboard feature in Skeleton. There's a lot of different use cases for actions. Specifically in their demo here, they're using a tool called Tippy, which is a third-party dependency. They're just importing that. And then they're going in here, and when this function is run, they create an instance of Tippy. They pass the node, which is the actual element itself, the button in this case. Any parameter options that are provided, like this, like in this object here. And then it makes use of that to set whatever settings Tippy requires to display. And then they even have like some setup and teardown methods. So there's a destroy method of when that button is maybe like removed from the DOM or something like that, it can run the destroy to just kind of clean up after itself. Okay, so that's an action, right? Now, if we look at what we're doing for skeleton, like I said, we're using an action here. We come in here and we can look at the source code for skeleton's pop-up feature, and you can see it's just a function called pop-up. We're taking in a node or HTML element in this case, args, which is the parameters that are being passed in, which is of type pop-up settings, those extra settings that we provided in an object. And then all of this kind of code is run to actually power the action. There's quite a bit here. It's quite extensive. It's quite complicated. We've been maintaining this for like a couple years, so it's grown in scale and scope and complexity, and that has some pros and cons. One, it's very powerful, but downside being it is very hard to maintain. And so when we started talking about this move from Skeleton v2 to v3 and kind of rethinking some of our features and reimagining some of our features, pop-ups were pretty much like the first thing we thought of. I would even go so far as to say the reason v3 exists is initially in part because of work that we wanted to do on pop-ups. So if we kind of jump over here, we can look and see like in the skeleton repository, we've kind of been tracking all of our milestone issues. So if you come in here, milestone skeleton v3 issues, we have a list of like, basically think of this as like a wish list of things we want to do for each feature as we're porting it from v2 over to v3. And so for the one for pop-up specifically, we've been maintaining this since August. So it's been around for a good long while. And in that time, we've provided a bunch of notes of things that we want to change. We've got lots of feedback from folks in the community, folks like yourself, just providing, their comments, their feedbacks. Hey, I'd like to see this. Hey, I'd like to see this changed. This is a little hard to work with. Lots and lots of good feedback. And so what we've done is started kind of compiling that down into, again, a wish list of, proposed features that we would like to make use of. And as part of that, what we've identified is that the scale and scope of this one singular feature is way too large for what we could ever possibly deliver. People are wanting to do all kinds of things with this to really kind of make it work in their applications. They have lots of different use cases, and there's not going to be a single, silver bullet that's going to solve all of these problems. And so we've kind of been evaluating our options. And so the very first thing that kind of, came to us was, maybe this is the point where we just get out of the way of floating UI, which is the dependency happening, being used behind the scenes to position the elements and display them, on the page and things like that. Maybe we just kind of move away from the abstraction of using the custom action that we're doing and let folks integrate floating UI directly. And so that is still an idea, and it's still something that we're considering, but we still kind of feel like there needs to be a little bit of room in between, because we want to still make it convenient for everybody to interface and interact with kind of these overlaid elements, but still use the power of what floating does, because they do have a lot of really cool stuff, from placement to handling the way things shift as the page scrolls, flipping, so if it doesn't get bumped off the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, sizing, there's arrow, creating the arrow that's displayed and kind of anchored to your target element, and so on and so forth. So lots and lots and lots of really cool stuff that you get directly from floating. That would be nearly impossible for us to build and maintain, and nearly impossible for most end users to build and maintain themselves. And so if you're not familiar with floating, you may be familiar with its predecessor called Popper.js. So this is essentially the spiritual successor for that. So very powerful feature. It's been around in the web dev world for a long time. Tippy and a lot of other kind of tooltips and overlay type libraries are typically using floating behind the scenes. So if you go to a Bits UI or a Shad CN, there's a good chance that they're using floating behind the scenes. It's just very powerful. It's pretty much the de facto tool for that sort of solution. So with that in mind, we know we want to keep floating in practice. We know we want to make things much more open-ended, so folks can kind of customize and tweak and adjust and make these work however they want, while still kind of checking the list of all of these different requests that folks have had, like the ability to add context menus, to have more programmatic control over the pop-ups, having delays, customizing the animations as the element comes into view or hides, while still, again, kind of making it simple to use. Things like long press to show. There's just it's an endless list of things that folks need and want for their applications for these things to work. Floating UI does not solve all of those problems. They are really very specifically around what they mention here, positioning the floating elements. So there's kind of two parts to this problem. One is the positioning, how to actually display the thing on the screen in the correct place, how do I anchor it to the particular element, and then how do I programmatically choose to show or hide that element, or any kind of animations or anything that kind of goes along with that. And so, we evaluated floating. We've also looked at a few other options. There are some native type solutions for this. In case you're not familiar, there is a native dialogue element, which is kind of used for, if you have sort of a pop-up, like a modal that's kind of appearing in the middle of the window. It could be used for drawers and stuff like that. And then there's more relevant here. There's the Popover API, which is the dialogue element is widely available and has been for a while across all browsers. The Popover API, unfortunately, is lacking. It is currently not released in Firefox. It's only in the nightly versions, which means it's close, but it's not quite there. I do want to kind of show this because it's kind of interesting to see that it is very close to the implementation we use for the pop-up feature in Skeleton, which is you kind of specify a target element, which is the element that actually pops up and displays, and then you kind of denote that is a popover. So it's a very similar kind of syntax or structure for how you're actually kind of grouping and providing that relationship between those elements, but unfortunately not available in all browsers yet, so we cannot lean fully into this. I also think there's some additional features coming alongside this in browsers to specifically handle anchoring. Anchoring is a different API as opposed to just showing an element overlapped on the page. But we are very curious to see this implemented in the future, because anytime we can lean into native browser features, that eliminates a dependency for you, which is ideal. And typically these features come with the best accessibility story out of the box. So just know we are looking at these kind of native features, but they are still potentially a ways out. There's still probably some bugs and issues that may have to be worked out. And so in the meantime, we are kind of keeping an eye on floating UI. Okay, theory and concept and all of that aside, I wanted to actually kind of show some quick demos. And so what I've done here is I've created a small prototype. This is nothing fancy. It's obviously very ugly, but this is showing what it might look like to utilize floating UI directly. They provide some really nice tooling and for React specifically. So if you come and look at the docs, they have a dedicated React section, and they have React examples, and they show all of these different tooltips and popovers and dialogues and lots of examples of what you can use floating UI to build. And so what I've done is I've just kind of pulled out a few of those that are kind of relevant to anybody that's used the Skeleton iteration. Things like a tooltip, like you hover over a button here and it shows the tooltip. You click on a button and it shows a drop down, or you click off of it. You can do things like context menus, so I can right click. So anywhere I right click on the screen, this blue menu is provided programmatically on click wherever I click, and I can interact with the options there. And then likewise, you can even go to that kind of extra degree of handling things like modals. So you can have the modal display that's centered in the middle of the window. You can see it has the background shim, the backsplash here, or backdrop. And so there's really a lot of you can do with the one library. So they're specifically kind of dealing with the positioning, but they're React specific kind of, I don't know if you would call it a fork or version here. that provides these kind of extra features, that provides extra hooks for React users to be able to set up and say, hey, I'm going to use floating UI. I need to handle hover and click events. There's all kinds of settings that you can go in there of whether or not like keyboard support is provided. It has things to add, particular roles for accessibility purposes and screen readers, how dismiss features work and triggering that on demand or programmatically, on and on and on. They have all these extra kind of bells and whistles with the version created for React. Now, given this is skeleton, we have direct support for Svelte, and we want to continue to have that. And so, unfortunately, they do not currently provide an equivalent version of this that works for Svelte. They have some loose support for React Native. They have some loose support for Vue, but you can see Svelte is not included on here at all. So internally, what we're doing is we're kind of talking through maybe working up a port of this feature, of the React-specific features over to Svelte. And this would be as part of a standalone library that's not part of Skeleton. It'd be under the kind of umbrella of Skeleton Labs in our company, right? But it would not be part of Skeleton itself. You would not install this. This would not be part of the core of Skeleton. This would be its own package that you can install and just use, whether you're using Skeleton or whether you're just somebody from the Svelte community that just needs better support for floating elements and floating UI, kind of these kind of extra bells and whistles that the React version provides. So that's something I'm going to kind of circle back to, but just know we are kind of in the early phases of talking through that sort of port and what that would look like and how extensive that would be. But yeah, it's check out the second video today. I'm going to show a little demo of some of that too. But just to give you kind of a quick example of what this is actually doing for the React version behind the scenes, I'm going to jump into my code and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see. And really what I've done is I've set up a very small kind of test project with Vite. We've got React working. We've got kind of a page layout here that showcases, these different examples. And then for each example, I'm just kind of abstracting that to a subcomponent just so that it's a little easier to manage. I just didn't want all that in one place. What I've done for the tooltip, for example, as you can see, I've got several imports directly from Floating UI. I've got my component that I'm setting up for, the example. I've got a state rune that has, this is the state open, true or false? Is it being displayed on the page? Then we've got all the floating UI features, which are just straight from the floating UI React package. You can see use floating, you can see use hover, use interactions. Those are all coming from the React package right here. And then we have the actual template here where we have our reference element, which is the trigger element, if you will, and then the floating element, which is displayed conditionally based on the state of is open. We pass some, the reference values to kind of wire everything up, some additional props that Floating UI is providing for handling the interaction, some styles that are maybe used for that. And then down here, we're also importing a Floating UI floating arrow component from Floating UI that is used to render and display the actual little arrow you see whenever I go over one of these components. So that little arrow at the bottom, that's coming from that component. And so the end result is it's a little bit of boilerplate, but it's really not bad. We're essentially setting up a reference to our arrow. We're setting up Floating UI. We're providing it a set of options for things like positioning. What is the open state? How do I change the open state whenever that changes? Any kind of middleware, which is extra kind of opt-in features for Floating UI. Things like how far offset is this from the target element. We're using an event to handle, hey, this is going to happen on hover, and then just passing those kind of interaction state sort of settings or properties down into this use interactions hook. And then anything that's relevant to that gets applied and the settings are updated using this kind of destructed method. So that's kind of in a nutshell how you could create a tooltip. Right now, this is inside of a component, but you could maybe imagine abstracting this to your own component that you could reuse. You could enable certain features. You could, you know, keep it as simple or as challenging as you want. So lots and lots and lots of options. And then all it kind of comes down to for, the styling for this is you could just, provide your own skeleton classes directly on, maybe like the little pop-up that's appearing, use your own skeleton colors, your themes, your spacing styles, all of those things to just kind of style this. So it is a very direct integration. So, that would be really cool, I think, for a lot of folks. And it kind of opens up that door of like endless possibilities of what you can build. Because again, if we look at the React examples, they have just a slew of examples. And it's not just pop-ups and tooltips like we have in Skeleton V2. It's not this small abstraction of a small subset of features. You get access to the full shebang. You get access to the whole thing. So by doing that, it means we can also do things like create a context menu or a drop-down menu, excuse me. And you can see the boilerplate's very similar to that. We're setting up some settings. We have the target element, and we have the actual element that appears on the screen. Context menus, a little bit more complex, a little bit more going on, but that's because it's doing a lot of different, it's got a lot of different state and things to kind of keep up with the positioning and all that. So again, it could get more and more complex if you really want it to, but the way that these are implemented is literally just following the documentation in the React examples here. So if you come in here and you go to the React section, they have kind of a walkthrough tutorial that teaches you how to build a tooltip using these tools. And that's exactly what I've built it off of, and then just made a few modifications to create a version for a menu and a version for a context menu and so on and so forth. And really, quite nice results. So, personally, I'm very pleased with this result. It does, of course, bring in some more complexity for how easy it is to set up. Everything's not abstracted away, but that's kind of, again, the end goal is we're trying to remove that abstraction, because that abstraction is limiting the scope for how many features that you can use to provide for your own, popover elements. And so the thing that I want to kind of really cover with this is if you look in the comment section, or excuse me, the description section below this video, I'm going to link to a written post that kind of covers everything we just talked about. It's going to have some code snippets of like what you're seeing on the screen, but I'm also going to share a version of this repository if you would like to clone that down and take a look at it yourself. That way you can kind of go hands-on and see exactly how everything's implemented, test the features, try changing the code, really just kind of get your hands on with it. See what you think about that. And then in that same written post, we'll have a comment section below. Just leave us some comments in the video or in the written post. Leave us some comments and let us know what you think. We're putting this out as a proposal, as an idea for how this could be approached. And, I really do want to hear folks' feedback. Now, I do expect some folks are going to say, hey, I like the simplicity of the V2 version. And that's completely okay. That's the kind of feedback we want to hear if that's the case. But I would kind of encourage you to give this a try before you get too far into it. Now, I know a lot of our folks in the skeleton community are Svelte users. There is not, again, that Svelte equivalent yet. So unless you have knowledge of React, this may be a little harder to use. But again, I would recommend jumping over and watching the second follow-up video today, which I will cover a little prototype of what we've got for porting some of those floating UI features over to Svelte. So definitely check that out. There'll be a demo you can use, code examples you can use and check out. But please do let us know in the comments what you think and help us inform the direction we go with this, because we're building Skeleton for folks like yourself, and it's very important that we kind of build this in a way that makes it accessible and easy for folks to use. And just so you're kind of aware, the general idea is we're going to kind of build this into the documentation. We're not just going to say, hey, go to the floating UI website and figure it all out yourself. We are going to create sort of like a dedicated section, similar to components down here, that just talks about popover elements and says, okay, here's how you create, we utilize floating UI, here's how you set it up, and then here's how you create a couple examples, how you create a tooltip, how you create a drop-down, and show that integrated with Skeleton. So you won't be completely on your own with the integration kind of approach. But I just wanted to kind of point that out. So again, let me know if you have any comments, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you much.